Hey guys, Alex here from Alex Cole Creation. So I wanted to give you guys a little bit of an update of what's going on with the folder project. As you guys have seen with the previous prototype, the Revision 1 prototype. So the Revision 1 prototype, everything was actually going really well with that one. The fit up and everything worked really well. That one had frames that were 187 thousandths thick. I've since switched to Revision 2, and on Revision 2 I decided to go with some 90 thousandths thick titanium instead of the 187 thick aluminum that I used in the first revision. And that titanium, being that it's thinner, it's posed some problems that I've got to work around. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about those issues, what I've run into, and what I plan on, trying to do to try to fix the problem. Okay, so here is the prototype with the 90 thousandths thick frames that I was just talking about. And so far, I mean, the titanium machined beautifully on the mill. I've got everything in place, everything lined up kind of the way I had it designed. The only problem that I'm really having with this one is with this button. So when you're creating a folder like this, you have 3 points of contact. So you have the pivot, you have the stop pin, which is down in here, and then you have the button itself. And that button is going to engage this little notch that we see right here. When the blade is open, the stop pin is going to rest up against this flat right here, and then the button actually engages in this little cutout. So this is a scrap blade, but so what I ran into with this version here, so in prototype revision 1, this blade actually works incredibly well. It locks up completely solid. Everything is really nice and tight and solid. Function on this is exactly where I want it to be. The problem that I'm currently having with this one, however, is once I machined the whole thing and put it all together, now my pivot's extra long, so I can't tighten the pivot screw all the way down. But just holding tension on here, I've got the little bronze washers. I'm using phosphor bronze washers in here. So just pinching the thing together and pushing the button all the way forward, right? So I have tension on that. I have just a little tiny bit. I'm talking just a few thousandths of an inch of play before those 3 points of contact actually come in and they're all making contact. So what does this mean and how did this happen? So I'm going to use this scrap blade as an example. I'll try to get the camera to focus on it where you can see that cutout well, which is easier said than done sometimes. So this little cutout right here, what's actually happening is the button, which I've got some buttons right here. Let me grab a button. I suppose I should have had one of these ready ahead of time. So this little button, if I can get that to focus on that button, let me see if I can get it to focus here. But that button has a little taper on it, and that little taper section just right in here is what engages in the notch of the blade and actually draws the blade into the stop pin so that the stop pin connects here. So we have the pivot, the stop pin, and the button engaging on this little notch. Now this notch, the detail of this notch, what I've figured out and then talking with a couple people and so on, there's a couple different ways of doing this. So I could try to get the circle of this notch to perfectly match the round bottom portion of that button. But in doing so, that actually kind of keeps it from like rotating this thing up against the stop pin. So I want the stop pin to be fully engaged on this flat. So actually I want this slot to be moved up that way just a little bit. And I'm talking not much at all, but just a little bit, so that it's actually, when the button's trying to fit in that circular cutout, it rotates this blade up against the stop pin, and that's what's going to hold it solid. Now, the problem I've actually had with this prototype, if we look down kind of in there, you can see where that taper is starting to come down and overlap the blade by just a little bit. The actual problem that I have is in this piece here, there's actually a counterbore that engages on the shoulder. See how this button has this little shoulder here, right? Well, this thing just doesn't want to focus for anything. Let's see. Okay, so it has this little shoulder here, and so there has to be a counterbore. There's a through hole that's the size of this diameter, and then there's a counterbore that's a little bit bigger than this diameter. And I did the math and looked at the way that this one's set up, and the counterbore in these handles, now these handles are 187 thick, right? And the new ones are 90 thousandths thick. So obviously they're quite a bit thinner, half as thick actually. And the problem that poses is that the counterbore that I used for these buttons are actually bigger than what I want. I ordered from a different supplier. They're pretty much the same button. I haven't actually found any buttons that I can buy that are a smaller profile, and these are much larger than what I want. But the problem is the button actually can't travel down far enough, because the counterbore that I had to make based on where I located everything, the counterbore would have to be 92.5 thousandths deep. But this frame piece is only 90 thousandths thick, so I can't cut a counterbore that is literally deeper than my piece, because that's called a through hole. So I've got a couple choices. Obviously I'm not going to replace this titanium, so what I'm actually going to do, this is a piece of AEBL stainless. I've been cutting everything and making my knives out of CPMS 35VN, but I switched over to some AEBL just to give it a shot. A lot of people seem to like it quite well. I'm not sure which I prefer to machine at this point. I think I actually prefer to machine the CPM, just because I like to machine harder stuff than softer stuff. But anyhow, I'm getting off topic there. But so I have a couple choices. Either I can make my own button to where the button actually doesn't have to travel out as far to engage on the blade, or I can move the notch on the blade itself just a little bit that way, and actually move it, this way. And I'm talking only maybe a degree or two. It really wouldn't take much at all, although you want placement somewhere to where when that is engaged, you have enough engagement to where you can compensate for wear that might happen. So, all right, so let's kind of take this thing apart so you can see what's in there, and then you'll be able to see it maybe a little bit better. Okay, so now I can flip this guy over, and we've got the backside frame piece. So we can see in this piece here, I have the spring pocket is already cut out for my spring with the locking leg. I have my stop pin counterbore So that does not go all the way through. That's a pocket that has a floor to it. And then I have the through hole. So that through hole is for the back side of the button. The button itself, sorry, I don't have much room to kind of work with this camera setup that I'm running. So, and here's the mechanism inside. So we have the stop pin. We have the actual blade and button will kind of have to come out together a little bit. Alright, so here's the button itself. We have the pivot with the bronze washer. So we'll set those aside. I also have a very small bronze washer that gets machined to make one for that side. So I've got the blade. It has the hole where the other side of the spring engages with the pocket. So that fits in there. And so here is this scale. And if this thing will focus, lighting is terrible for this. It's very difficult to take pictures of shiny stuff in garage lighting here. But there's a little tiny counter bore that goes around there. And that counter bore, this button just slips in there and fits. But that counter bore keeps that button from being able to go all the way through. And so that's important. You have to do that. But that counter bore is also engaging on the button. The tolerance for the button, obviously you want it to slide up and down, but you don't want it to move so much, you know, that it's when the knife is deployed and locked up that the button can wiggle around, because that's part of your 3 points of contact. So you need that button to be solid, you know, to hold that. So yeah, this button and these buttons that I'm looking at, the dimensions on these buttons are, you know, this gap here is much larger than what I actually need. So there's a couple things that I could do in making my own buttons. I can narrow this gap, because these buttons are actually designed to work with a blade all the way up to 156 thousandths wide, and I'm only using 125 or 100. I may even do some that are 093 or 93 thousandths thick. So this is just a waste of space, and so it makes the blade profile wider than I really want it to be. The second part is the diameters that are used for the taper section and the flat. So I can actually, this small diameter that's at the small end of the taper section, I could actually make that diameter larger and still use the same taper angle on my lathe and make a new button that will engage with less movement. And it will still engage at a large diameter. So one way of fixing this issue that I have is to make my own button, and make a button to the profile that I want. And I may end up doing that because I can shorten the overall length of the button in its entirety, which would allow me to custom make the width of my knife to exactly the way that I want. So I haven't thrown that out. I may end up happening to do that. But for right now, if I can avoid happening to do that, that'll just be one less piece that I'll have to make in this project for each one of these knives, which will save me time, which will allow me to keep costs down, which means I'll be able to sell them for a lower price, which is what I'm really trying to do. I'm trying to stay in that target range of $200 to $300 total by the time this whole thing's done. I really am not trying to build and sell $500, $600, $900 knives. That's just not what I'm looking to do right now. So yeah, so you know, I can't take this counterboard really any deeper. In fact, I'd like to back off, and I had originally cut it to leave a 25 thousandths thickness behind the counter bore. This one I've actually milled down to where it has a 12.5 thousandths thickness behind the counter bore, And though that I was hoping that was going to be enough for it to work, that won't give me enough longevity of as the button wears and this thing needs to push just a little bit further out to engage, if there is wear on these buttons. These are hardened stainless steel, so I hope not, but as there's wear, I want those buttons to last. So I think what I'm going to have to do, and probably what I'm going to do, is I'm going to make another blade. And when I make this blade, I'm going to start playing around with where this actual engagement piece is, this notch. So I will move this notch that way, just a few degrees, which will allow this to engage that button in a better spot. But one of the things that I learned with the first revision is that I want that button to stick down and engage as much as possible on that blade. So I don't really want the button to engage by the small end of the taper. I want it to engage by the large end, or as far as I can. And so just by moving that slot, that's going to be a little bit of a delicate process to find that sweet spot. So what I'll probably do is maybe make it a little bit shallow, and I'll machine it and put it together and test it, and then maybe slowly creep that slot. I'll start too far over. I'll go past where I want, and then I'll just slowly start to bring it back and see where I end up, because I can put this back in my fixture and you know, re-indicate or line it up with the pivot hole, and just keep playing around with where that spot is, to get that thing fine-tuned. So once I have the actual lockup and the function of everything dialed in, then I can actually start looking at the aesthetics of this. So I talked to some friends of mine today that, you know, I'm working on pocket clip ideas. I'm working on the scales that are going the outside, different ideas for that. And I haven't even totally dismissed the idea of going back to 187 thick material, only leaving it thick where I need the critical dimensions. So maybe around the pivots, maybe around the buttonhole, and then mill everything else down to the 90 thousandths thick, and then attach scales to fill in and make up that space. So that's another way where I can kind of get back to where I know, you know, the action is solid and I've got plenty of room to get everything dialed in. And as long as I'm using these bigger buttons, I'm always going to have to have that thickness. So I don't remember exactly how thick this one measured up to when it's all done, but you know, I did take quite a bit of material off the face of the button. Getting out of camera there. I did take a bunch of material off of the face of the button on the first revision prototype, so it's not nearly as long, but that didn't change that fit up between that collar that's up here and where the taper is. So all I did was just remove material from this end. So and I will probably plan to do that with this design as well. So all right, there's an update for right now. I mean, I've, you know, made a couple blades here. I'm going to have to play around with getting that done, getting this kind of dialed in. All of this is a matter of finding the tolerances of where things are located and what's going to be repeatable, because I plan on making, I don't even know yet. I've kind of thought about maybe only making 12 of these when it's all said and done. I'm thinking right now about only making about 12 of these knives. So you know, I mean, I want to be able to not have to dial in each and every single one of them. I'd like to come up with the design and the fixturing and the process to be able to get the action good, so that I can focus my time and attention on all of the other fit and finish of the piece. The other thing that I'm playing around with right now is just the different washer designs and ways that this thing is going to rotate. I know some people use bearings. Some people just use these phosphor bronze washers. You look at some of the production knives that are out there, and not necessarily cheap ones, and they might not use any bushings at all. As far as I know, none of the Kershaws do. I could be wrong, but you know, they just have the actual coating that's on the frames, and they just rotate on that. So I know most of my Benchmade stuff has some sort of phosphor bronze in it. But yeah, so I'm just playing around with different washer ideas and so on. So if anybody's got any questions, feel free to comment, send me a message, whatever. You can, you can follow all of my progress, and I post pictures. I try to post stuff as often as possible, at least once a week, but maybe every couple weeks. But you can look at my Facebook page, Alex Cole Creations. I've got an Instagram account. You can look up Alex Cole Creations. There's links on all of my pages to the other pages. And then I've got my YouTube channel, which I just created a new channel because my old one had a bunch of mixed stuff in there from my jeeping days and my knife making stuff. So I started a whole new channel just for going through these auto knife prototypes and working on these folding knives. So please like and subscribe there. And like I said, if you have any questions or any comments or thoughts on anything, feel free to drop me a message or a comment. And I thank you for your feedback, and I hope that you continue watching. Thank you.